In the third year of my on-and-off relationship with Greg Hinson, I said I wanted to get married. He finished his cigarette, silently grabbed his coat, and left. The next day, the media captured photos of the young master of G-City entering a jewelry store. My best friend congratulated me in advance. "He must be buying an engagement ring for you. Just wait, you're definitely going to be Mrs. Hinson." I didn't dare admit it out loud, but I was secretly delighted. That night, in front of many acquaintances, Greg took out the ring he had bought and handed it to the man in the wheelchair behind him. "Uncle, I heard you're looking for a marriage partner. Coincidentally, Tracy also wants to get married. Don't worry, I've trained her well. She'll take good care of you. See how considerate I am? I even prepared the ring for you." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. During the 3 years I was with Greg Hinson, we spent most of the time arguing. He was cold and harsh. I was aloof and unapproachable. Neither of us were easygoing. Friends around us sharply commented, "Anyone can break up, but not Tracy and Greg. They're a perfect match of difficult people." After our last big fight, he knelt on one knee on the ground, bandaging the wound on my palm. On the floor was the glass I had smashed. "Greg Hinson." He didn't even lift his head. "I want to get married." The man paused, remaining incredibly calm. He only said, "Don't let the wound get wet." Until I finished washing up and lay down to rest, he personally cleaned up the mess in the living room. Then, he silently finished his cigarette on the balcony, grabbed his coat, and left. He didn't give me an answer. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed in a daze at 6 in the morning. Memories of the past involuntarily flooded my mind. Logically, with such different identities, Greg and I should never have been together. Even meeting was a luxury. He was the young master of G-City, with an arrogant nature. One time, in a fit of anger with his family, he raced cars in a reckless mood. He crashed a car worth 8 figures into my art exhibit. A year's worth of my hard work was destroyed. At that time, I didn't know who he was, and I lost my temper, grabbing a spiked club to go beat him up. The staff stopped me, explaining in panic, "Just looking at the car, you can tell he's someone you can't mess with. Don't be impulsive." I cried out of anger. "Anyway, if he doesn't give me an explanation today, he'll die here." Greg got out of the car, covering his bleeding forehead, his bad mood written all over his face. "How much? I'll pay. Pay for my paintings." I was really furious. The man nodded after hearing this and made a call. "Bring a few lawyers over, and prepare a check for 10 million. Then, he maintained his posture of holding the phone, tilted his head, and looked at me, satisfied. 10 million was more than enough to buy my paintings. I really needed the money, so I had to compromise. Apologize. Greg looked at me with a playful expression, scrutinizing me for a while. "Fine, I'm sorry." As a result, I fainted without realizing it. I fell forward, right into his arms. I forgot to mention, I faint at the sight of blood. That day, I was very honored to make the news with Greg Hinson. The headline was, "The young master of G-City drove a minor artist to tears and into the hospital." It was then that I realized he was indeed someone not to be messed with. Our first meeting was unpleasant. It was also the fuse for the ill-fated relationship between Greg and me. He lost a game at a drinking party and was required to call the last woman he contacted. I got the call. But what he heard was my cry for help. I was being stalked. When the man arrived, I was standing there in a daze, holding a blood-stained brick, with the unconscious assailant at my feet. "Greg, I think I killed someone." He covered my eyes. "Don't panic." He squatted down and seriously checked the person lying on the ground, who was still breathing. That night, Greg accompanied me to the police, to the hospital, and then sent me home. The streetlight in my neighborhood was broken. He turned on his car lights to illuminate my way home. "Tracy, I still like your fierce and impulsive side from that day." He watched me go upstairs and said this. That day, the word security appeared in my heart for the first time. Later, as we kept getting involved in various matters, we met more and more often. I don't know who first said, "You two are really destined, it would be a pity if you're not together." Because of this sentence, I realized that I had started to like Greg Hinson. But he was never short of admirers, each more beautiful than the last. I also heard that many years ago, he had a huge falling out with his family over a girl he loved, though they eventually parted with regret. But everyone knew that was a past he refused to mention. So, I became timid. On Greg's 25th birthday, there was an unexpected event. I was coaxed and tricked into a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows. At midnight, blue fireworks suddenly lit up outside the window. From that perspective, it was simply a feast. Then, my name appeared on the building opposite. "Tracy, will you be my girlfriend?" There was a soft sound behind me, and I turned around. Greg appeared with flowers, smiling. Confessing is something a man should do. The beginning of the story was so beautiful. In less than 3 months of being together with Greg, we started arguing. He was proud and rarely admitted his mistakes. Coincidentally, I was also stubborn. Giving in was impossible. Sometimes, our arguments ended up in bed. The Hinson family turned a blind eye to my presence. After all, they thought he was just playing around with me. No one expected that Greg would play with me for 3 years. During that time, I said countless times that I wanted to break up. Of course, he didn't back down either. It was like we were masochists. If he didn't make up, I would. I don't usually like drinking, but today is special, so I took out the fine wine Greg had stashed away. After a few sips, Helen called me with something urgent. The first thing she said was, "Are you two getting married?" Helen is my best friend who knows everything about me. She has seen everything between Greg and me over the years. At first, she tried to advise me, "Greg Hinson might not be sincere with you, don't get too deep." Later, after witnessing our countless breakups and makeups, she rolled her eyes and said, "Please, just lock it down." I was feeling down and wondered where she heard this news. Helen got more excited as she spoke. "Haven't you checked your phone? It's all over the internet. Some media outlet caught Greg at a jewelry store, and everyone's saying you two are finally getting married." I pulled out my phone and found the trending topic. The photo was indeed of Greg. He was even wearing the suit I bought him. The man stayed inside for an hour, and when he came out, he was carrying a bag that was definitely the size of a ring box. I still couldn't believe it. It can't be. After all, his attitude last night didn't seem like he was planning to marry me. Helen understood the whole story and comforted me. "Don't worry, he definitely went to buy you an engagement ring. Just wait, you're destined to be Mrs. Hinson. Remember to dress up nicely tonight. I can't wait to see you get proposed to." I was still unsure, so I wore a mask and went to that jewelry store. Only after I revealed my identity did the staff dare to tell me the truth. Greg did buy a ring in my size. Was he really going to propose to me? I felt a mix of emotions, but mostly anticipation. At 7 p.m., I received a message from Greg. "It's my uncle's birthday, you should come too." I pressed my lips together and typed, "Do I have to go?" Mainly because of Greg's uncle. Before I could reminisce, Greg called, his tone neither warm nor cold. "Come on, it's pretty important today. Oh, and wear that white dress." I rarely wear white dresses, the only one I have was a gift from Greg. I once asked him why he gave it to me. The expression on his face was unreadable. I thought it looked nice, so I bought it. When I arrived, there was a waiter waiting for me. The elevator was for VIPs, but someone had already arrived ahead of me. The waiter bowed respectfully, "Mr. Hinson." Phil Hinson looked over at the sound. I hurriedly avoided his gaze. "Also the 35th floor?" The waiter confirmed. I stayed silent the whole time, my palms slightly sweating. He hadn't changed. Phil Hinson's leg condition was well known in the city. He had been using a wheelchair for years. His assistant pushed him inside. I was still standing there, thinking of taking the next one. The man said leisurely, "If you don't come in now, you'll be late." I had no choice but to enter under his ambiguous gaze. No one spoke as the elevator ascended. When we arrived, I sighed in relief. The waiter opened the door, "The young master is inside." I politely stepped aside, wanting to let the elder go first. Phil Hinson's attitude was indifferent. Let's go together. The room was quite crowded, and I had met almost everyone before. Greg didn't notice my arrival. He was playing a game with someone. He lost. Someone asked him to choose between truth or dare. The man glanced at the person opposite him and smiled, choosing truth. I looked over curiously. It was a beautiful woman. She looked vaguely familiar. Everyone was eager to challenge the young master, throwing out a sharp question. If Jessica and Tracy were both drowning, who would you save first? I remembered. The woman who caused Greg to fall out with his family back then was named this. Jessica Lush. She was beautiful, and her name sounded pleasant too. No wonder he liked her so much. From my angle, I could only see Greg's side profile. He was smiling. Of course, I'd save Jessica. Tracy can swim, I taught her myself. Jessica laughed and threw a card at his face. Don't be so glib, don't let your girlfriend misunderstand, I won't explain for you. Everyone present had a "we got it" expression. After all, not everyone would dare to throw something at the young master's face. Greg indulged her action, saying slowly, Tracy wouldn't mind. If she does, I'll just coax her. That year, I went on vacation to the beach. He had something to do and didn't come with me. Because I couldn't swim, I almost drowned in the deep sea. Greg hugged me with a look of fear. Thank God you're okay. Tracy, let me teach you how to swim. I won't feel safe letting you go out alone otherwise. Back then, everyone around said Greg had been reformed by me. The once unruly young master had finally changed. But at this moment, I found it quite ironic. Tracy? Hearing someone call my name, Greg paused for a moment. When he turned his head, the smile on his face had faded a bit. When did you get here? He brought me a cup of warm water. I didn't take it and said while looking at him, I arrived when you chose not to save me. Greg just raised an eyebrow and didn't explain. He whispered for me to wait a moment, then walked away. Phil Hinson doesn't drink alcohol, only tea. Just as he picked up the teacup, someone called, Uncle. He took a slow sip. The tea was mediocre. Greg had long been accustomed to his attitude and didn't dare to be angry. Instead, he smiled apologetically. I got caught up in the game earlier and didn't come to greet you right away. Please don't blame me. In this G-City, the only person who could keep Greg in check was the man in front of him. In the early years, the Hinson family wasn't as prosperous as it is now. They were besieged on all sides, with everyone wanting a piece. At the age of 20, Phil Hinson returned to the country and took on the heavy responsibility. In just 3 years, he managed the Hinson family business smoothly. However, fate is cruel. Due to a car accident, his legs could no longer stand, and he had to step down. To put it bluntly, Phil Hinson was used. Greg wanted to completely overthrow him. But playing with an old fox, he never gained the upper hand. So, today he decided to do something disgusting. Today is your birthday. Don't just sit here hiding for peace. Phil's gaze shifted from him to somewhere not far away, hinting at something. I think you should finish your own business first. Jessica Lush came over with a glass of wine, looking me up and down. Tracy, right? I often hear Greg mention you. I should have thanked you a long time ago. If it weren't for you, Greg would still be immersed in the pain of our breakup. But you're quite remarkable, able to endure his bad temper. It's been 3 years, and you two aren't tired of each other yet? Her words were even more aggressive than her face. Only a fool wouldn't understand the implication. I looked back at her with the same gaze, casually crossing my arms and smiling faintly. Miss Lush, you've been thinking about him for 3 years. It seems you haven't found the next one yet. But, I think your matter is still up in the air. Mrs. Hinson said, as long as she's alive, Greg will never marry someone with the last name Lush. Jessica's face changed slightly, biting her lip and starting to act innocent. Miss Tracy has a big opinion of me. Is it because of my ex-girlfriend's status? Many people looked over, sympathizing with Jessica and condemning me. I remembered a saying, the attitude of your boyfriend's friends towards you actually represents his attitude. No, I just purely dislike bitches. Probably in Jessica's circle, she had never heard such dirty words, so she was so angry that her eyes turned red. Greg sternly warned me, "I didn't invite you here to quarrel today." Then, he apologized to Jessica on my behalf. She always has a bad temper. "You're kind-hearted, don't hold it against her." Jessica pretended to be magnanimous, patting him on the shoulder. "Forget it, since we're friends. Just treat me to a meal another day to make up for it. Oh, don't forget to bring your girlfriend, so she won't misunderstand us again." Greg didn't turn around, so I didn't know what expression he had when he said that sentence. "No need, soon she won't be anymore." Jessica showed an exaggerated, surprised expression, covering her mouth. "Don't break up with Tracy impulsively because of me." My face showed a few traces of embarrassment. Greg pretended not to see, maintaining a polite smile on his face. "Actually, I'm not the main character today." He took out a bought ring, but it wasn't for me. Instead, he handed it to the man sitting in the wheelchair behind him. Phil Hinson supported his head with one hand, looking like he was watching a show. "Uncle, I heard you were looking for a marriage partner. Coincidentally, Tracy also wants to get married. Don't worry, I've trained her well. She'll take good care of you. Look how considerate I am, even prepared the ring for you." My breath tightened, and I forced a smile, trying to convince myself he was drunk. "Greg, today is not April Fool's Day, and this joke is not funny at all. Giving your girlfriend to your uncle. How absurd." But his smile didn't fade, and he broke free from my hand. Indifferently said, "I'm serious." At this moment, I felt my 3 years were truly ridiculous. If I had a time machine to go back 3 years, I would definitely tell my past self, "Never fall in love with Greg Hinson. He is really not worth it." The onlookers were speculating whether I would make a scene. Even Jessica looked at me with pity. They were sure I wouldn't dare. The Hinson family is not to be messed with, and Greg is not a good person, vengeful and ruthless. I could only admit defeat. Tonight, I became a joke. There was the sound of a wheelchair approaching. Phil Hinson calmly received the ring. He took my hand and said in a faint voice, "Didn't you tell him about us?" The ring fit perfectly. As soon as he spoke, the atmosphere seemed to shift. No wonder they call him a sly old fox. Greg narrowed his eyes, his tone momentarily flustered. "You two know each other?" I hid all my displeasure. Taking Phil's hand, I leaned slightly against him. "He's irrelevant, no need to tell him about us. By the way, you said you wanted to take me to Hokkaido to see the snow last time. When are we going?" The man's hand tightened imperceptibly, and he smiled. "Tonight, just in time to celebrate our successful engagement." I'm not one to suffer losses, so before leaving, I slapped Greg. It was in front of everyone. "You're quite terrible too. I tolerated you because of our 3 years together. How dare you hit him?" Jessica held the man's face in distress. "I don't hit women," so I splashed wine on her face. The red liquid made her look utterly disheveled. "Tracy, are you crazy?" I smashed the glass. "Yes, rabid dog crazy, so stay away from me, or I'll bite you to death." Greg grabbed my hand, gritting his teeth. "When did you and Phil Hinson meet? What exactly is your relationship? What have you been hiding from me?" The man's furious and ashamed expression was truly ironic. Who would have thought he was the one who pushed me away an hour ago? "What right do you have to question me? Greg Hinson, don't forget, you're the one who ended it, just now." He tightened his grip, determined to get an answer. Greg Hinson. Having waited for me at the door without seeing me, Phil came back in to look for me. Seeing this scene, his face darkened slightly. "Be polite to your aunt." Jessica also advised, "Greg, don't be foolish. She's no longer your girlfriend." I raised my hand and slapped him again. Greg didn't dodge at all, and his handsome face turned red instantly. He let go of my hand. I didn't want to stay a second longer, and I said to Phil, "Let's go." He nodded slightly, casting a meaningful warning glance at Greg. Once the main characters had mostly left, the remaining people dared to discuss boldly. How thrilling, treating his 3-year girlfriend like a pawn to his uncle. Honestly, I kind of feel sorry for Tracy. You feel sorry for her? She gained a lot from Greg over the past 3 years. You should pity yourself, even working honestly can't compare to her sleeping around. Someone who knew a bit of the inside story sneered. Greg's target wasn't Tracy, it was Phil Hinson. What's going on between him and Tracy? They seem to have a close relationship. What do you know? She just to save face in front of Greg, deliberately deceiving him. Do you really believe that? How could Tracy have the ability to know Phil Hinson? Greg, who had come back to get his phone, heard this and paused. He leaned slightly against the wall, thinking for a moment. Yeah, how could Tracy know Phil Hinson? She must have been acting to anger him just now. Phil never used cologne. His car was very low-key. It was the kind that blended into traffic unnoticed. The driver had raised the partition in advance. In this small space, Phil was the first to break the silence. Why didn't you come to see me after you returned to the country? I looked out the window. Is there a need for us to meet? After all, when we parted back then, it was quite unpleasant for everyone. I went to college abroad. When I first arrived, I was unfamiliar with everything, my language skills weren't great, and I suffered quite a few losses. When I was almost penniless after being cheated, I had the idea of robbery. So, after wandering around the rich neighborhood for a week, I targeted a young man. First, he looked wealthy. Second, he was always alone and almost always walked to school. Third, he was very kind-hearted. I often saw him squatting by the street feeding stray cats. Before making a move, I hypnotized myself that I only needed $200. And I would definitely repay him after I got my salary in a month. My shadow scared away the cat, and I spoke with a trembling voice. This is a robbery. The man looked up at the sound. He was incredibly good-looking. Fair-skinned and beautiful. This was the first time I had seen his face up close. Then I started to regret it. He clapped his hands and stood up, his voice very soft. Robbing what? Money. I said, feeling very spineless. I nervously gripped the toy knife in my hand. This isn't a good behavior. Are you in some kind of trouble? Maybe I can help you. He was really nice. I lost all resistance. My stomach, which had been hungry for 3 days, finally couldn't hold on anymore. And I squatted on the ground, crying loudly. A kind passerby thought I was in danger and called the police. Then, we were both taken away. Mr. Hinson, you can go now. It was the lawyer he called who came to get us. The man stretched his uncomfortable neck and stood up. But the kind-hearted him didn't forget to take me along. He took the car keys from the lawyer. You can go now, I'll handle the rest myself. Yes, sir. I was so hungry that I couldn't speak. I curled up in the passenger seat, pretending to sleep. A piece of chocolate was thrown into my lap. This is all I have in the car, do you want it? At the police station, we learned each other's names. Thank you, Phil Hinson. I'm sorry, I apologized for my actions. He didn't say anything, just turned the steering wheel with one hand and parked the car in the garage. Get out of the car first. As I had guessed, he was a young master from a wealthy family. The garage was filled with many sports cars whose names I couldn't even call out. Phil cooked a big meal for me. He was very good at cooking. So good that it made me want to cry. The man handed me a tissue to wipe my tears. You can work for me, I'll pay you. At that time, Phil was busy with his studies and had many jobs coming from home. He needed an assistant. I stayed. Room and board were included, the salary was not low, and most importantly, the boss was extremely good-looking. I was an art student. He specially reserved an empty room for me to use as a studio. He said he didn't understand it, but he never disturbed me. When I came back to my senses after painting from morning to night, he would bring me coffee. It looks good. Our beginning was the purest. He had done me a favor. The day our relationship changed, I was still in class at school, and he said he was passing by and came to pick me up. After hanging up the phone, I hurried to pack my things, but as I was about to leave the school gate, I was stopped by a boy. He was a mixed-race cutie. Why did you reject me that day? I politely stepped back a little, because I don't like you. He was a bit persistent, but you gave me gift, sang with me, and didn't refuse when I invited you to dance. I answered one by one. The gift was for your birthday, everyone in the class gave one. Singing was because the instructor strongly recommended it, and I couldn't refuse. As for dancing, friend, that was just a simple social dance party, and I danced with more than one guy that night. He was a bit sad but still unwilling to give up. Tracy, why won't you accept my confession? Tracy. A tall man got out of a black Maybach by the roadside. Phil looked great in black. He walked over and naturally held my hand. Going home? The cute boy in front of me realized what was going on, his eyes showing a bit of resentment and more sadness. It was from that day that I noticed Phil was starting to like me. He seemed not to understand love, so he didn't hide his gaze at all. I thought about confessing to him on my 22nd birthday. But an unexpected event happened first. A woman claiming to be Phil's mother appeared and woke me up harshly. I don't care about your little games, but now the Hinson family is in crisis, and he needs to go back and handle it. The best way is to marry a girl from a good family. Miss Tracy, what can you give him? I couldn't give him anything. When blowing out the candles, he received a call from the Capitol, and he went to the balcony to answer it, hiding from me. How come I didn't know I had a fiancé? The man sneered, sorry, I don't accept it. If you dare to do something to Tracy, just give it a try and see what happens. Separated by a wall, I heard everything clearly. I already had the answer in my heart. So after blowing out the candles, when Phil asked me what wish I made, I said, to study hard, graduate smoothly, and marry and have children with my boyfriend. When I finished the last sentence, the man was stunned for a moment, then said in a daze, boyfriend? I nodded. Yes, I agreed to go out with him. He's the cute man you saw at the school gate. How about it? Not a bad choice, right? Phil stared deeply at me, saying he didn't believe it. Phil, I love him very much. This sentence of mine became the fuse. He went crazy. Pinning me down on the sofa, his eyes red, his voice choked, are you lying to me? Tracy, you don't like him, do you? I controlled my emotions, raising my head and smiling faintly. Shouldn't you be happy for me? He gripped me so hard, he almost wanted to strangle me. That night, I dragged my suitcase and got into another man's car. It was raining, and Phil stood in the rain, looking desolate. Tracy! I didn't look back. I fell asleep and was woken up by my phone vibrating. The car was dim and extremely quiet. Phil had been watching me for who knows how long. He reached out and wiped away the tears at the corner of my eyes. Why are you crying? Is it because of Greg Hinson? I turned my face away and made up an excuse, just had a nightmare. The man didn't respond. Phil's private jet was scheduled to depart in half an hour. Originally, I wanted to go back and pack some luggage. But he said he had already made arrangements and everything was prepared over there. While waiting in the VIP lounge, Helen almost fainted from anger after understanding the situation. Seriously, who does he think he is? A spoiled brat with a bad temper, just because he has some money, he thinks he's something. I wish Greg Hinson a lonely and miserable life, with no one by his side, and to die alone. Would Greg die alone? I didn't think so. He had countless admirers around him, and now, the woman he had been longing for all these years had returned. He should be getting what he wished for. But I was unwilling to accept it. Why should he? Helen, upon hearing about my situation with Phil, disagreed for the first time. Phil Hinson may not be a promiscuous person, but considering the sudden incident years ago, the people around him aren't good. The longer you stay with him, the more danger you'll face. I smiled bitterly, even without him, I wouldn't be any better off. Don't worry, tonight's engagement is just for show, he won't marry me. Phil hates me too much for that. Helen hesitated, but Phil's assistant came to remind me that I could board the plane. The flight was delayed a bit because Phil seemed to be held up with something. I didn't pay much attention. By the time the plane arrived in Hokkaido, Japan, it was already 6 in the morning. Yawning, I entered the room, and Phil stayed across the hall. If you need anything, Call me, and I'll come right over. Phil hadn't changed, he still liked to think of others. I nodded politely and didn't say much. I slept until the evening. There were several missed calls on my phone. Helen sent me a screenshot. It was a post from Jessica's social media. The man in the photo who was drinking cross-cupped wine with her was Greg. The caption read, "The cross-cupped wine we promised each other when we were young, fulfilled after all these years. My friend sent this to me. I can't stand this scumbag and that witch. Tracy, I seriously suspect that Greg has been using you as her substitute all these years, and they never lost contact. Otherwise, how could he force you to leave in such a disgraceful manner as soon as she returned?" I didn't reply to the message. I didn't know how to respond. Helen's suspicion wasn't unfounded. I once saw a menstrual tracking app on Greg's phone. Back then, I only suspected that he might have fallen for someone else. But Greg had a face that seemed incapable of lying. He held me, kissed me repeatedly, and explained calmly, "It's all for you. Your period is always irregular, and when it comes, you're in excruciating pain." I was surprised by Greg's sudden change, but more than that, I was touched. I was naive then and didn't open the app to check. Maybe I would have seen that the recorded dates had nothing to do with me. Thinking back now, if Greg had been in the entertainment industry, his acting skills wouldn't have been bad. He acted for 3 years, and I didn't notice a single flaw. A cold wind blew, snapping me back to reality, and I found myself walking in the snow. Everything in front of me was white, snow pressed down on the bamboo planted by the hotel, gently falling with the wind. I couldn't see the path under my feet. Looking back, the way I came was also covered in snow. I took off the ring. It was very shiny and big. What was Greg thinking when he chose it? Was he excited about the success of his prank? Or was he finally glad to be rid of me, someone who had clung to him for 3 years? Probably both. I let go, and the ring fell into the snow, disappearing quickly. Not a trace left. So, 3 years of feelings amounted to this. Tracy. I turned around in shock. The assistant fixed the wheelchair in place and tactfully left. Phil held a black umbrella, his striking face under it. "Aren't you cold? Come here." I didn't know what I was feeling as I walked over slowly. He didn't rush me, just reminded me to watch my step. The man handed me a scarf. It still carried his warmth. "Phil." I lost the ring. I meant that the proposal, which was treated as a joke, didn't count. "You don't have to take responsibility, and I won't hold on anymore. We can each go back to how we were." But he lowered his eyes, gently and elegantly, and put gloves on me. Without looking up, he said, "I'll buy you 100 more. If that's not enough, I'll buy more." I paused, feeling inexplicably anxious. "Are you serious?" Phil looked at me, unwavering. "I've always been serious. Wanting you is real. Marrying you is real. Wanting to take you home is also real." Greg drank a bit too much tonight. Jessica came to comfort him. Can't let her go? They had just found out that Tracy really went to Hokkaido with Phil Hinson. And at that time, Greg didn't know what he was thinking, but he didn't refuse her request to drink cross-cupped wine. He even indulged her by letting her post the photos on social media. Adults like to keep things ambiguous. She thought it meant Greg tacitly agreed to get back together. Can't let go? The man sneered, finishing his drink and smashing the glass on the ground. You really think I can't live without Tracy? I couldn't be happier to be rid of her. It's not that he didn't love Tracy. You could say, in the beginning, if someone had made him choose between Tracy and Jessica, he would have chosen Tracy. Yes, he admitted, at first, he felt Tracy's crying reminded him too much of the year he was forced to break up by his family. And Jessica cried as she said goodbye to go abroad. He missed Jessica. Later, when they were really together, he found that the two of them were nothing alike. Jessica always went along with him, rarely arguing. Tracy had a tough temper, like a thorn that hurt to touch. But he didn't dare to pull it out. Even the best relationships can grow tiresome. He began to resent Tracy's defiance. He started missing Jessica abroad again. But he felt it wouldn't be right to just abandon Tracy. So he dragged it out. If Tracy was the gourmet meal of life, then Jessica was the occasional dessert. Everyone thought Phil Hinson was crippled, that his brains alone wouldn't be enough. Just a few more years of waiting, and the Hinson family would be his. But he had long known that the biggest beneficiary of old Master Hinson's will was his disabled uncle. He was unwilling but unable to do anything about it. He heard that Phil Hinson was looking for a marriage alliance. Despite his current state, many socialites were eager to try. Just as Jessica returned to rekindle their old flame, Greg somehow thought of a win-win solution. Send Tracy away. He was the one who said he didn't want her, but seeing Tracy with another man made him uncomfortable. Everyone said Greg drank too much, but he insisted on shaking off their hands, stubbornly saying, "Impossible." Jessica tried to support him, but he coldly pushed her away. "Don't touch me. If Tracy smells another woman's scent on me when I get home, she'll fight with me again." He was so drunk he forgot he was single. "You guys don't know, Tracy is really hard to appease." Jessica's face couldn't have looked worse. "Phil asked me what I wanted to do for fun. I looked at the distant snow-capped mountains. Skiing. He arranged for a coach to teach me one-on-one. After I awkwardly skied a few meters, he looked at me approvingly and reminded me to be careful. The coach supported me as I skied and joked, "Your boyfriend really likes you." I instinctively wanted to explain that he wasn't my boyfriend. But when I touched the new ring he bought last night, I suddenly remembered that Phil and I were almost getting married. "Why do you say that?" The coach smiled. "I've taught many rich young men's girlfriends before. And whenever they see something a bit dangerous, they immediately stop their girlfriends, saying it's out of concern. They say that's what love is. But I always feel that the first step in loving someone is respecting her. He could have told you not to learn because he was worried, but he didn't. He just told you to have fun and be safe. Because you like it." In the afternoon, there was a small accident. As I skied confidently on my own, a boy suddenly appeared out of nowhere, blocking my path. I couldn't turn, so I shouted for him to move while heading straight for the fence. When the staff carried me out, Phil had just finished a call and dealt with some work. He had the medical staff check my injuries. Then he scolded the staff, "This area is privately booked by me. How could someone else appear? If my wife gets hurt, I won't let it go." The child who caused the trouble was scared to tears, and his parents kept bowing and apologizing. Phil said coldly, "I'm not the one you should apologize to." They turned to me and said many apologies, promising to cover all medical expenses. I nodded slightly, "I accept your apology." I sprained my ankle. The plan to return home had to be postponed. I felt bad about delaying Phil. "Why don't you go back first?" "There's nothing much here." He learned a set of rehabilitation massage techniques from the doctor. His hands were warm, and he deliberately used a gentle touch, which put me to sleep several times. He said frankly, "I'm worried about you." Maybe seeing that I was bored, he brought up a topic. "When do you want to have the wedding?" The topic of marriage had always been something we avoided. Because we both knew it was just an accident. "Phil, I'm not ready to get married so soon. I just broke up and can't accept someone new so quickly. And you stepped up that day to save me from embarrassment, for which I'm very grateful. But marriage is no small matter. We both need to think it through." I thought he would be angry or cold. But he just smiled faintly. "Okay. I'll think it through. You should too." While reading on the balcony, a snowball suddenly hit me. I thought it was a prank by some kid and didn't take it seriously. Until the second snowball landed at my feet. I looked down and unexpectedly met Greg's gloomy eyes. He had done rock climbing before, so the third floor was nothing to him. Seeing my bandaged right leg, he frowned irritably. "Is this how he takes care of you?" I didn't want to see this person and looked at him impatiently. "Why are you here?" "Because I miss you." Greg didn't say what was on his mind, he always thought it was too sentimental. "Tracy, you're so afraid of the cold. This place isn't suitable for you. Let me take you home." I closed my book and started to chase him away. "If you don't leave, I'll call someone." Greg wasn't scared. He feared nothing. He smiled roguishly. "Go ahead and call. How do you think I got in?" Those people obediently opened the door for me. Phil's room was right opposite, but according to his assistant, he had just finished an all-night meeting and had taken a sleeping pill. I was about to call out when someone covered my mouth. "Shoo, if you make a sound, I'll kiss you." Then, I was lifted off the ground. Greg adjusted his hold on me. "How can a cripple take good care of you?" "I'm taking you home." I was disobedient and kept struggling until I heard a sigh above my head. "Tracy, don't blame me." A sharp pain came from the back of my neck, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was already in the Capitol. Greg brought me back to the place where we used to live together. He personally cooked, making all my favorite dishes. I didn't look at them, only feeling disgusted. "Greg Hinson, have you had enough?" The man squatted at my feet, speaking to me with a conciliatory tone for the first time. "Tracy, what can I do to make you forgive me?" He was actually asking for forgiveness. I laughed. "Fine, then go die." There was no humor in Greg's eyes, only disbelief. "You hate me so much that you want me to die?" I slapped his face decisively. "Yes." The man grabbed my hand. "Feel better now?" Again. He was really crazy. The atmosphere was tense when the doorbell rang. He didn't move. Jessica's voice came from the door. She was banging on it desperately. "Greg Hinson. You owe me an explanation." "What do you mean by it's over?" "What do you mean you don't like me anymore?" I suddenly sneered, looking at him with contempt. "I really despise you." Greg's breathing became heavier, a trace of sadness flashed in his eyes. Jessica wouldn't give up without seeing him. She shouted loudly, "You have the guts to hide in there forever. If you have the guts, keep Tracy hidden well. I'm telling you, Phil Hinson is back. You took his woman, he won't let you off." The last ray of light before dusk fell on the man's profile. Greg looked at me greedily, holding my hand tightly. "Don't be afraid. I won't let him find us." He was truly insane. The thread of reason in Greg's mind snapped completely when he saw a photo. It was a photo he got from someone he hired to investigate Tracy's past. In the photo, a man and a woman were holding hands. The man was Phil Hinson. They had known each other for a long time. They even lived together for several months. Greg never believed in pure friendship between a man and a woman. So without digging deeper, he knew what might have happened during those months they lived together. He couldn't help but recall. Did Tracy agree to be with him because he also had the surname Hinson? Did she still love Phil Hinson? The woman who had professed her love for him countless times actually had another man in her heart all along. He felt like a clown. He had agonized for so long, afraid of betraying Tracy's feelings. He tore the photo into pieces. Losing control, he flew to Hokkaido overnight, hoping that nothing had happened between them. But even if something had happened, he didn't care. He was going to take Tracy back. Greg nailed all the doors and windows shut. Not a single ray of light could come in. "Tracy, now no one can find us." I didn't bother to speak. There was no reasoning with someone like him. There were many footsteps at the door. Greg had installed a surveillance camera outside, and the screen showed the police preparing to storm in. They were shouting for Greg to release me. Phil stepped out from the crowd. He could walk now. "Greg Hinson, open the door, you can do whatever you want to me." No one inside responded. Greg somehow found a box filled with the gifts we had exchanged. There were clothes, necklaces, stuffed animals, and a box of expired chocolates. I had made them myself. Greg had a sensitive stomach, and after eating one, he had to go to the hospital. So the box with one missing chocolate had been kept until now. He started reminiscing. "Actually, I lied to you. I didn't like those chocolates. I pretended to have a stomach ache to get into the hospital. That time we had a date to see a movie. I lied and said I was delayed by work, but I was actually abroad celebrating Jessica's birthday. The ring you gave me, I lost it in a game. I thought, it's just a ring, I could buy another one." He said a lot. I was unmoved. It didn't matter anymore. When love is gone, none of this matters anymore. "Tracy, did you ever really love me?" I closed my eyes, refusing to answer. In the pitch-dark room, the only sound was his faint sobbing. I didn't quite understand why he was crying. This relationship, he had never been sincere from the start. What was he regretting? Greg opened the door. He looked at the man in front of him. "Take her away." Phil rushed in frantically to find me. His face was full of indescribable worry. "Are you okay?" I shook my head. "I'm fine." As he carried me out, Greg, who was being handcuffed, walked past us. The man looked at me with a gaze full of reluctance. "I'm sorry." I turned my face into Phil's chest, not saying a word. Later, I heard that he was sentenced to many years in prison. Just when I was surprised, Helen accidentally let something slip. That day when Greg took you away, he had someone set a fire in the hotel, trying to burn Phil Hinson to death. Phil had the news blocked and specifically told me not to say anything. I then remembered why I saw a scar on Phil's wrist. At that time, he had just casually said, "I accidentally got burned, it's no big deal." Phil's leg had actually healed long ago. But over the years, he had been pretending for appearance's sake. Sometimes, you can only do certain things in the dark. He returned to the Hinson Corporation. His methods were impressive, making everyone look at him in a new light. At 28, he was as high-spirited as when he returned to the country years ago. After resting for a while, I suddenly had the idea of traveling around the world. I mentioned this to Phil. He just asked if I had enough money and if I needed him to prepare anything. I smiled and said I had everything I needed. The man's eyes were clear and gentle as he raised a glass of red wine. "Then I wish you a pleasant journey." On the day of departure, I left very early, deliberately avoiding Phil's time. Boarding the plane alone, I felt a sense of excitement for the unknown journey ahead. There are two rumors in G City. One is that the head of the top-tier Hinson family, Phil Hinson, has always been unmarried. But he always wears a ring on his ring finger, saying he's waiting for someone. The other is that Phil Hinson, who has been married for many years, is deeply devoted to his wife. Although he's a workaholic, he takes time every month to pick up his wife who is traveling abroad and bring her home.